No, I don't think all of a sudden this 11th hour conversion to all of a sudden we are economists is going to be changing
Wow,
Canadians'
but
minds
public
about how
opinion
liberals
would
manage the
suggest
economy.
otherwise in terms of where their
Well, no,
confidence
public
is.
opinion is very interested in, I think, Mark Carney because you guys hide him behind whatever and they're just campaigning on his resume. Sounds great. But
I never thought I would say this, but I love the CBC and I love journalists, and I will show you exactly why in just a little bit here. Also, the Conservatives have spoken to what may very well be the most damning truths about Mark Carney yet. The ones that everybody in the media is trying to hide, even though if they were actually investigative reporters, they would be screaming this off the rooftops like I have been. We're going to be talking, by the way, about some instant regret from those reporters and the Liberals quite literally reminding us exactly why it is that they need to get out of our lives. I'm Jasmine Lane. This is Over Opinionated. Subscribe, follow, like, comment your thoughts down below. And before we get into everything else, I really just wanted to show you this. Somebody we haven't talked about in a while, Mr. Jagmeet Singh.
Well, one of the things I want to contrast with Pierre Poilievre is that he's talking about making Canada more like the U.S., cutting the rules that we have to protect workers, the rules to protect the environment, our important relationship with Indigenous people. He's suggesting that those things can be skipped over, making us more like the United States. That's not what Canadians want. They're starting to reject the message of Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives more and more because he wants us to be more like the United States. Canadians want to be proud of who we are, and we don't want to be the 51st state, not just in name, but also in values and who we are. And so I believe we can absolutely build important projects like an east-west energy grid. We can build that, but we have to respect the environment. We have to ensure that it creates good local jobs. We have to make sure that we're working in partnership, in collaboration.
Regardless of the rhetoric right now around Donald Trump, it is quite literally laughable if you want to use that. Pierre Poilievre wants us to be more like the United States. And if you just want to look at the data of how much the United States is outperforming Canada, I mean, I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty darn great to me. Also, just to clarify, Pierre Poilievre has said nothing of the sort of what Jagmeet Singh just said that he did. And before we get into Pierre Poilievre's response to what Jagmeet Singh just said, let's first listen to what Mark Carney said earlier today during his press conference about just what all of the liberal NDP-backed policies when it comes to creating anything in this country, making any money in this country, and prospering as a nation has actually done to us.
Today's reality is that even when Canadians, particularly young Canadians, are doing everything right, they're getting a good education, they're studying hard, they're securing a well-paying job, they're saving up, they often barely have enough to pay the rent, let alone to afford a new home. On average, across this country, it takes over 4 years to save for a down payment. For first-time buyers, it's over 6 years. And in markets like Vancouver, much longer. This has been the most expensive housing market in the country for a very long time. So business as usual will not work. The status quo cannot stand. We need a new approach that recognizes that it's time to build.
Thank you for that reminder of the damage you have done to us, our youth, our hopelessness, and also our future, Mr. Carney. Anyway, though, here is what Pierre Poilievre had to say about his plan to build. You know, the one who initially had the plan to build.
Promise to scrap C-69 and fast-track energy projects. How do you balance out the Indigenous land rights and environmental review processes, especially in light of the recent court rulings on Indigenous consultation?
Yes, you're a very good question. After the lost Liberal decade, Indigenous rights have been trampled by this Liberal government. Liberals blocked the Northern Gateway pipeline with Mark Carney's vocal, on-the-record opposition to that pipeline, even though 80% of First Nations people along the path supported the pipeline. They killed the Tech Frontier mine, even though all 20 First Nations communities around the mine were 100% in favor of it. And the Liberals are keeping our First Nations people in poverty by blocking the resource projects that their communities support. And we interpret Section 35 of the Constitution to go both ways, that we have to consult First Nations who are opposed to projects, but we have an obligation to consult also those that are in favor of them. The Liberals did not consult one First Nations community when they killed the Northern Gateway pipeline. And the result is that the 500,000 barrels of oil that we could have been sending to Asia at world prices every day are now going to the Americans at enormous price discounts. And make no mistake, it's the same Liberal MPs, same Liberal ministers, same Liberal strategists with the same Liberal policy. And Mark Carney testified against the Northern Gateway pipeline. So let's not, because he has a banker's haircut and he wears a normal pair of navy blue socks, don't think his position on these issues is any different than Trudeau. He supports C-69, which means there will not be another pipeline or LNG plant ever built again in this country. He supports the energy cap, which applies to Canadian energy but not American energy. He supports an industrial carbon tax, which will make major projects impossible to go ahead. So electing the Liberals to a fourth term will mean higher costs and crime and a falling economy under the American thumb. What we need is a change with a new Conservative government that will axe taxes, green light home building, pipelines, resources, so that we can stand up to the Americans from a position of strength for a change.
And you know, I've really been thinking about this a lot lately, how Mark Carney is paraded around as being this world-renowned economist. Oh, he saved us. But having said that, I mean, one, people who are reiterating that clearly have no idea what the job of the governor of a bank actually entails. And two, they haven't actually realized and listened to what Mark Carney is saying, because it seems pretty bizarre to me, at least, for a world-renowned economist to have yet to present a single plan to boost our economy. No, Mark Carney has only presented plans that consist of spending more money.
And that's why my government will provide $25 billion, I'll repeat, $25 billion in financing to scale the industry up massively.
And I'll repeat, Canada is currently on track to achieve a milestone of a $100 billion deficit this year alone, based on the spending over the last few months. Remember, it's only April. Mark Carney and Jagmeet Singh, though, and honestly just everybody in the Liberal Party and NDPs have long gotten Conservatives for this. They say, oh, they're so bad because they want to cut. And of course, there's always the fear-mongering of healthcare and blah, blah, blah. And of course, provincially, federally, there have been cuts that have been made that haven't necessarily always had the greatest long-term fallout. I would say overall, if you just want to look at these statistics, though, life in Canada was far more prosperous under the last government, Harper, than it is today. And there's a reason for that. So, you know, when you want to weigh things out, were some of the cuts that they made actually that detrimental? And if they were that detrimental, well, why didn't the Liberals fix that over the last 10 years? But of course they didn't, because it is far easier to rule over a society who needs you than it is to rule over a society who doesn't. And that appears to be exactly what Poilievre is trying to make here. And I was actually listening to a podcast earlier today where there was a woman who said that, you know, she's gone between Conservative and Liberal so many times throughout her life. I actually don't really believe that now that I've listened to the full thing to hear her full take, because she said that she's familiar. And the one thing that a lot of Canadians don't know, and this is why Mark Carney is supreme, is that Pierre Poilievre has voted against all of these social services and these things that really help us. And Poilievre is not against helping Canadians, nor are the Conservatives. He's against wasting billions of dollars in programs that sound nice but don't fix the actual problem. It is cause and symptom thinking. You are working on the symptom, you are not working on the cause. And that is why we are in such a big mess.
And friends, it's no secret that our country faces today another historically challenging time in the form of the Trump administration. There is no sugarcoating that. But the bulk of the problems that afflict our country, falling living standards, declining employment and housing opportunities, rising crime, the growing divisions between our regions and our people, these were not created by Donald Trump. They were created by the policies of 3 Liberal terms, policies that the present Prime Minister supported and wants a fourth Liberal term to continue.
It's really incredible to me to hear the audience boo Pierre Poilievre's rally last night. We had reports saying 10,000, some saying 15, some saying 12. Either way, an awful lot of people were there.
Pierre has consistently opposed those policies. Policies that have put costs up, accelerated crime, left our wealth in the ground, and made our economy vulnerable and under America's thumb.
And do you want to know why he has opposed those policies? This will go back into kind of fact checking that podcast lady who I was listening to this morning. You know, Pierre didn't support Trudeau's housing plan because it was more bureaucracy, it was more red tape, and it ignored the real issue, which was mass immigration, something that Mark Carney and his advisor Mark Wiseman are very much in support of. They were not building homes fast enough. That's why. It was for the little details inside of those policies and those bills that actually aren't good, and they aren't actually helping anybody or anything or our country. They are only spending money to make it look like you're helping, but you're not. He opposed and has been critical of liberal childcare, the dental care programs, not because he hates families, but because they're underfunded, they're unsustainable, and they were rolled out with no real plan.
And Pierre has, just as importantly, long advocated the positive alternatives for change, to axe those taxes, build homes, bring back jobs, get our resources to the whole world, and stand up to Washington from a position of strength. Friends, I believe that the challenge this country faces today from the United States, as real and serious as it is, should not be another excuse for Liberal failure. Instead, it should be a historic opportunity. That's how we've got to see it. An opportunity to make Canada what it should be. Internally united, internationally connected, a truly independent economy with the highest living standards in the world. And with those benefits, enjoyed not just by protected elites, but by all the people of this country in every region of this country.
Now let's compare that to what Mark Carney had to say about Pierre Poilievre, the Conservatives, in dealing with Trump yesterday.
When you're in a crisis, my experience, what you need to do is distinguish between what you can change and what you can't. And it's not really a big insight, but I don't think at 78 we can change Donald Trump. And a person who draws their inspiration from Donald Trump, like Pierre Poilievre, he'll kneel before him before he stands up to him. And as Premier Smith said, and I quote, Pierre Poilievre is in sync with Donald Trump. Pierre Poilievre is choosing to be willfully blind to the many and growing threats that face our country.
Wow, what a riveting speech that was. Didn't that just make you feel so positive and hopeful about your future? The energy in that room, oh my gosh. I hate to do this, but, liberals do it to me all the time. So dare I ask, Mark Carney, could you provide your receipts? The proof? The facts? Where'd you get that from? Can you link me a source, perhaps?
We will. The Conservatives once again welcome Mark Carney to our policy platforms. Like, he announced it a little while ago, and they're here at the party now. That's great. I think it's a good idea, no matter what, and I'm not surprised that they continue to make a play for boomers and seniors, because that is the voters that are migrating their way. It's smart politics. I do candidly just want to take a little bit of exception to Carlene's assertion that Conservatives can no longer position themselves as defenders or in any way an edge on the economy. That is insane to me, given the record of the Liberal government, which has had record deficits, overspending. The budget will balance itself over the last 3 terms. So no, I don't think all of a sudden this 11th hour conversion to all of a sudden we are economists is going to be changing Canadians'
But
minds
public
about how
opinion
liberals
would
manage the
suggest
economy.
otherwise in terms of where they're
Well,
coming
no,
from.
public opinion is very interested in, I think, Mark Carney, because you guys hide him behind whatever and they're just campaigning on his resume. Sounds great. But the reality of what he may or may not be as PM is a very different thing. We haven't really had an opportunity to vet him, and he continues not to be fulsomely vetted in my mind.
I am really just at such a loss for words with how many people disdain the Conservatives so much, and I don't blame them for it if you've been paying attention to the news and all of the narratives that have been going around and misleading information. But how on earth can you be so dense that you dislike a political party to the extent where you cannot even acknowledge that something is very wrong and it's your party of choice to blame? That doesn't mean that you like the Conservatives. That just means that you have some self-awareness.
The steady hand, the experience, and you know, what exactly is Pierre Poilievre, other than the grievance about everything that the Liberals have done wrong, what is the plan? He just keeps articulating the same 5 talking points, but there's no plan. And he doesn't actually understand how the economy works, because he's never actually worked in the economy.
Yeah, I mean, so much for the all-Canada approach when you're trying to throw premiers under the bus to make the crowd laugh at your fundraiser in Victoria. I just listened to the other two talk about the professionalism of Mark Carney, and here he is making fun of the 2 premiers that have made leaps and bounds in these negotiations, including Doug Ford, who took over for the previous Liberal leader at the time we needed it the most, when his cabinet and his government were falling apart. So I don't think that's a very good look for Mark Carney. But also going back to kind of what Jono was saying, today at the wildest day on the stock market, I want to juxtapose the 2 leaders. So we had Pierre Poilievre talking about resource development and growing the economy. We had Mark Carney out talking about building parks and free summer vacations in Canada's parks. At a point, Canadians are going to say, how do we get out of this economic mess? And when you look at the history of terrible markets, for example, 2008, when we had Prime Minister Harper, we had Canada's Economic Action Plan, where we invested in resources, we invested in transportation, infrastructure projects, and Canada fared really well. Who today is of the 2 leaders are talking about that? That's Pierre Poilievre, not Mark Carney.
It is just so baffling to me how many Canadians are completely okay with the fact that they know nothing about Mark Carney. And I am so grateful for this journalist for asking this question. It's something we've covered on this show before.
This last December, when Mark Carney was still running Brookfield and economic advisor to Trudeau, he talked about a deal he had worked out where his whole idea was to change government policy and then have Brookfield invest. This was about jet fuel in Texas, where they convinced governments to bring in 10% biofuel by 2030, biofuel being about 80 cents per liter more expensive. So he is both advising, and then his company is signing $1 billion deal to profit. Stephen Guilbeault, Gerald Butts, and Carney's own wife, Diana Fox, is involved in the same kind of consulting. What kind of impact has this kind of way of doing business had on the Canadian people and on the Canadian economy?
Well, it's crony capitalism. It works against these people behind me. Let's just unpack what Mr. Carney did in this particular case. He used his political power to convince the British government to require more expensive jet fuel for air travel. And then his company invested $1 billion in the company that was selling that jet fuel. So if, God forbid, a family like the people behind me here want to take their kids on a vacation somewhere, they have to pay higher airplane ticket prices to fund this more expensive jet fuel so that Mark Carney's $1 billion investment can pay off. Mr. Carney is not a businessman. He is a political grifter who has used his political influence to turn decisions that profit his company at the expense of workers and seniors. And that is exactly how he would govern the country. While he was Justin Trudeau's economic advisor, he went on the record saying that he thought there should be more inflation. He thought it would be good if there was more inflation. Well, it turns out Brookfield, his company, profits from inflation. They get to charge higher rents on their tenants, according to their CEO. So he has used his political influence to rip off workers and seniors, and now, with all the political power of a prime minister, he continues to be invested in the same company, Brookfield, the same company that benefits by raising inflation, by raising energy prices, and by ripping off workers and seniors. Today's announcement is another example of that. How would Mark Carney ever be trusted to make our tax system fair when he's invested in a company that has billions of dollars of cash stashed away in an overseas tax haven? Of course, he never would. We need a prime minister who will put Canada first for a change, who will stand up for lower energy prices, lower taxes, less inflation, bigger paychecks. I've been spending my entire adult life fighting for the people who are here behind me today, fighting for their paychecks, for their quality of life.
I'll have a few more segments from those CBC panels on tomorrow's episode because they were just so good, as well as some more revelations about Mr. Carney. I'm Jasmine Lane. This is Over Opinionated. We're going to close out with something else that Stephen Harper said last night when he introduced Poilievre at that record-breaking, history-making rally in Alberta. Be sure to subscribe to the show here on YouTube. Give us a follow on other platforms. Like the video and comment your thoughts down below, and I will talk to you very soon.
You know, friends, I am in a unique position in this federal election. I am the only person who can say that both of the men running to be prime minister once worked for me. And in that regard, my choice, without hesitation, without equivocation, without a shadow of a doubt, is Pierre Poilievre.